So we are crossing the Harvard Bridge, where Harry Houdini made his famous jump. Okay, so behind us is Harvard Bridge. This is the site of Harry Houdini's famous jump. So back in April 30th of 1908, Harry Houdini, who is arguably one of the greatest magicians of American history, pulled a fantastic stunt here. He was going to be in town for 2 weeks, and what better way to promote your appearance than with a death-defying stunt? So he goes ahead and gets himself shackled by a Boston patrol officer. He's got his hands handcuffed behind his back. He's got one around his neck. There are 20,000 spectators lined up to watch this madman jump off this bridge. He says one last little farewell, telling them that he hopes he survives, and jumps in 30 feet to the icy waters of the Charles River. People wait an agonizing 40 seconds. Let's think about that. 40 seconds. Then he pops up, handcuffs off, shackles off, crowd goes wild. He goes down in history. So, hooray for Harry Houdini. We are quite impressed. And while you may be asking now, what does this have to do with witches and witches' schemes? Well, first off, it's magic. We appreciate all forms of magic. And let's not forget, Harry Houdini died on Halloween a couple of years later. So, there you go. We thank you, Harry. And that gets us crossing Harvard Bridge, which is one of our 3-point schemes we're working on of Merry Magic and Mayhem. So, 2 more to go on this, and we'll have scored this, guys. Keep your fingers crossed. We'll see what we can do.
We're here at the Harvard Medical Countway Library of Medicine, which houses the Warren Anatomical Museum, which is where Phineas Gage's skull is housed. So we met the first bullet here on the Merry Mayhem and Magic Witches scheme. And it was really interesting to actually see the skull close up and to see where his skull was patched back on top. If you're not familiar with the case, he was a railway foreman. September 13, 1848, he was using a tamping rod to tamp down some explosives so that they could help build the railway out in Vermont. And he didn't put the sand down and got a spark from the rock, and the rod, which is about 3.5 feet long, went through underneath his left cheekbone and went up through his eye, took out his left eye, and went through the top of his skull. They did find a portion of the skull, and they were able to fasten that back on. He almost died of sepsis and infection after the surgery, but he actually recovered, which was really kind of uncommon then. They had the anesthesia that they needed for the surgeries, but they didn't have the antiseptics developed at that time, and so often people would successfully survive the surgery only to die of infection from the surgery. So he lived for 12 years after that, but he was never the same. He said, not the same Gage. He was very efficient and a very competent foreman. He wasn't able to return to those duties because his personality had changed so much. And he was rash. He had difficulty following through on decisions. He spoke his mind, which apparently they weren't used to. And it was very interesting that for the first time, physicians were able to see the connection between decision-making, executive function, and personality and the frontal lobe. And it's also interesting to note when you go through the Warren Anatomical Museum, you see comments about how physicians at the time made a connection between moral behavior and illness. And I can't help but think that as people saw that his behavior changed from an anatomical change, that perhaps physicians started to separate out moral behavior from the physical structures, and that it's the makeup of our brains that can influence our behavior. So we were very excited to be able to see the Phineas Gage skull. They also have the Lowell hip, which was the beginning of modern malpractice suits, so that's very interesting. I recommend that if you have any interest in kind of the abnormal anatomy, that you come out and visit the Warren Anatomical Museum.
Okay, so we are at an area in Boston called the Boston Neck. It gets its name because a lot of roads came together here, sort of everything fanned out from there. It also is notorious for being the home of the Boston Neck Gallows. This is the spot where the very first person was hung for witchcraft. In 1648, a woman named Margaret Jones, who was a traditional healer, she was very good with herbs and healing people with salves and all sorts of stuff like that. was so good at her job that people started to think she was in league with the devil. This got to the point where people were convinced so much so that she was bewitching them, and the only reason they were staying healthy was because of her evil herbs. So when you took away the herbs, people got sick again. Go figure. Anyway, one thing led to another, and sadly, she was hung. In 1648, again, the first person to be hung in the New Bedford area, the New England area for witchcraft. So this is where everyone thinks it was, in front of, which is now part of the church here, this nice green area. There's some skepticism about where exactly it was, but if Anne-Marie pans around again, you will see there is a bar appropriate enough called the Gallows, but I don't think that's actually where it was, and she said I couldn't count that, so we'll call that close enough. But we will also count that as our third scheme on this 3-point witches scheme, Merry Magic and Mayhem, which means we have completed it. We have scored 3 more points, which puts our total at 7 for the Boston area. So we are very quickly creeping up on our goal of 13, and stay tuned. We'll see what else we can score as we move on.